The Institute for Global Dialogue hosted a timely and urgent conversation just hours after President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the 2026 State of the Nation address. And in a world marked by rising geopolitical tensions, shifting alliances, and growing calls for global reform, South Africa's foreign policy choices matters now so more than ever, where the president reaffirmed commitments to non-alignment, African development, multilateralism, and human rights. But what do these commitments mean in practice? How will they shape South Africa's voice on the global stage at large? So today we're going to be unpacking the strategy, the stakes, the implications as well. Dr. Philani Mthembu now joins us from the Institute for Global Dialogue. Dr. Philani, a very good afternoon and thank you for your time. Thank you for choosing to spend Valentine's Day here with us on the SABC. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to have pertinent conversations because this is about this unity project, democracy, what's at stake in the shifting geopolitical landscape. How do you begin to interpret South Africa's commitment to non-alignment in this current global context? Paint that picture for us.
So I think it's actually become more important, especially in a changing geopolitical landscape. Countries like South Africa essentially should not be limiting their options. What they're trying to do is essentially expand their options, expand trade routes, and especially to diversify their economic exports, especially in an environment where we're seeing new tariff structures from the United States, despite the extension of AGOA. And so non-alignment has become of greater strategic importance for a country like South Africa, especially in a shifting geopolitical landscape. Africa becomes more important, the global south becomes more important, but also we've seen the country trying to consolidate its relations with European countries. So the EU remains an important market. But I think we are still negotiating access even into the US market, despite the political pressure we continue to face from the White House.
Let's get into that a little bit further as well, the role that South Africa then can play in actually reforming global institutions when it comes to the UN, when it comes to the IMF, when it comes to the African Union as well, balancing those power dynamics, how that is also playing out. We know that the AU is also currently hosting its summit and there's lots that's stopping the agenda. But are we at the forefront? Are we asserting ourselves or are we merely just reacting?
Well, I mean, it's a crucial year, 2026. South Africa finds itself again in the AU's Peace and Security Council. And we're also finding ourselves chairing the Southern African Development Community. I think those are both quite strategic positions. They allow South Africa to project its values, its vision, particularly within the African continent. And of course, we remain a key player within the United Nations system. We should also acknowledge that because of the different pressures that the UN system is facing and reduced funding, one of the outcomes of that has been South Africa's withdrawal from its peacekeeping mission in the DRC, so through MONUSCO. And part of that is both domestic pressures, but also external pressures. Funding towards UN peacekeeping missions is in question, especially with the United States having reduced its funding towards the UN. But also South Africa finds itself where it has to reconsolidate its role in terms of peacekeeping. It has to reconsolidate the role of the South African National Defence Force and sort of do an assessment of its capabilities and what kind of resources needs to be re-injected into the Defence Force.
Because, Dr. Philani, it's about achieving those targets. But if we're looking at what the foreign policy actually is signaling to investors, I mean, we're looking at how that impacts the path towards growth, towards industrialization, African development, regional integration, that was emphasized by the president as well, how South Africa should be leading on those priorities, how we balance the economic partnerships and with these major powers at large, whilst maintaining diplomacy.
Yeah, I think what was also important, particularly in the State of the Nation address, is what the president emphasized are some of the domestic enablers of a strong foreign policy. the reality is that if South Africa's economy is not performing well, it limits its ability to assert itself globally. It limits its ability to provide global public goods and, to basically continue to be a peacekeeper within the continent. And so I think a lot of what South Africa emphasized through the SONA was essentially trying to rebuild the economy, trying to rebuild the logistics network, the logistics system within the country, trying to reinvest in the port infrastructure so that in terms of the role the country plays in the global value chains, but also within the African continent,
Yeah.
it's able to have a larger economy. And if it is not able to do that, it has a direct impact on its foreign policy. We're very close to 2030, which is where the world essentially wants to have reduced and completely eradicated extreme poverty. And we know that while some countries have done well, other countries have not fared as well. And so if South Africa is to play a proactive role, particularly within Africa, it has to rebuild its economy. It has to tackle its domestic challenges. It has to rebuild state institutions. It has to professionalize its state architecture and invest also in its diplomatic capabilities, in our missions abroad. Economic diplomacy becomes much more important. And so the country has to be able to tackle the root causes of poverty, the root causes of conflict within the continent. And it can only do that if it's regrowing and rebuilding its economy.
Yeah, which also speaks to the point about diversification, the ACFTA, how that's also faring practically, how that's assisting us. Even relations, where South Africa is obviously participating in BRICS and, with other South-to-South initiatives, how it helps to advance national and continental interests, that pace of change.
Yeah, I mean, look, India is chairing BRICS this year. But also, I think South Africa is already thinking towards 2028, when it will next host the BRICS. At the same time, I think, despite the fact that South Africa has sort of retreated from the G20 this year, because of the conditions that the US has essentially imposed, South Africa continues to engage the next host of the G20, which is the UK. And I think what South Africa is trying to do there is to ensure that some of the key outcomes from the leaders' declaration of its G20 presidency are carried over, not necessarily into the US presidency, but certainly when the UK takes over from the US. I think what's also important is the reality that the African market becomes much more important for South African products. So the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area becomes quite strategic for South Africa and also for South African companies.
When we even look at defending human rights internationally, the consistency on that front, what comes to the fore for you? But even as we look at how South Africa itself then applies these principles on home soil, the challenges, in positioning itself perhaps as a bridge between competing global powers as well. Let's weigh up those pros and cons, how we're seeing it playing out in real time as well, given our foreign policy.
So I think South Africa has a sort of a multidimensional approach to human rights. If we look domestically, what we have is the Bill of Rights, and that what that guarantees us is essentially the right to development. And when it applies that at a global level, yes, it's about protecting individual rights, but it's also about protecting the right to development. So if you see the role that South Africa has played within the UN, within the African Union, it continues to try to ensure that development issues are at the fore of global discussions. And so the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2063, that ties into the country's approach towards human rights. Because if you are not able to guarantee the right to development, then what that does, it obviously has a negative impact in terms of livelihoods, It has a negative impact in terms of countries' abilities to provide for their own citizens, which leads to mass migration. Forced migration leads to conflicts. So the country has to be able to work with its counterparts, both within Africa and beyond, to tackle the root causes of conflicts, which a lot of the times it's an inability of states to provide an environment for development to thrive for their citizens. And I think that's where South Africa has to play a key role. But also in conflict resolution, not only conflicts within Africa, South Africa remains actively engaged in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It continues to be engaged also in Ukraine. And that's the role that the country seeks to play.
Well, we're seeing the shifting geopolitical landscape play out. We're seeing how, on some aspects, our foreign policy has been lauded, and we'll see what continues from here into as the year plays out for us. Thank you, Dr. Philani Mthembu, for weighing in at this hour, making sense of what transpired post the SONA 2026 speech, how inspiring it was on the, with regards to foreign policy, the Institute for Global Dialogue weighing in as well, just hours after the president delivered his speech there. So we'll continue to monitor all of that, of course, as we edge closer to budget that's taking place in just a few weeks as well, and how this gets to translate on the ground in real time.